I'd love to start by just telling you a story about a mission that I was on actually in Iraq. And so as a fast jet pilot flying the Tornado GR4, so for any of the Aussie listeners out there, it looks a little bit like the F-15. So just think Top Gun, basically, and you're going to have an idea of what it looks like. So it's got this huge fin on it. But I was flying the Tornado, and I was on a tour of duty over defending the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. And we were coming up to the end of our about 3.5 month detachment. Mm-hmm. And in the run up to the night, I'm going to sort of describe to you the routes between sort of Baghdad in the north of the country and Al Basra, which was in that south sort of east corner. These arterial routes had always been really busy, but once we got down to the Saudi Arabia border, it was much calmer, it was much quieter, and not a lot had happened. So you're already starting to build up that picture of where I'm going really on all the different elements, because we would do full threat briefs, consider every what if scenario. The planning stages for a mission that you're going to go on is huge. Mm-hmm. You know, you're considering, what if I lose an engine perhaps near, you know, to the north of my route? What happens if we have a radio comms failure? All of these different scenarios you cover in so much detail. So when something does happen, you're not just thinking about it for the first time. It's not therefore a reaction. You're actually just creating a measured response. That's what you're trying to do constantly with that training. And so we've done all this full threat brief. It was a 4-hour mission, and I happened to be leading my first ever combat mission that night. And we were on a reconnaissance mission, or we were basically doing what's called a show of force. So we were simply showing a presence over southern Iraq to prevent the build-up from enemy troops. And as we were coming back down across the Saudi Arabia border, pretty close now to the Kuwaiti border, which was where we were based, I was engaged by a surface-to-air missile. It was launched in a heat-seeking mode. Locked completely onto my engines, and my navigator just shouted at me to brake right. I instantly slammed my throttles fully forward, and I rolled the aeroplane to about 120 degrees angle bank, pulled very hard towards the ground, and he started putting out our flares, which are basically like a very, very small pyrotechnic that burns at an incredibly hot intensity. And what it does is it creates a diversion, taking away a heat source from your engine to create a diversion, basically a decoy. And for ourselves, we were very lucky. As I chilled my engines, I bring back the heat source, the flares then leave, and we watched a missile go from being locked onto us to pulling off and to explode about 2 miles away. And basically, I might have uttered a couple of small expletives at that point, obviously, because we basically had pretty much a near miss. But the way it works out in that theatre of war was that once an aggressive act was made towards any one of the coalition forces, and there were about, I'm not entirely sure the number, probably about 30 to 40 aircraft airborne that night.
Yeah, wow.
If any one of them was engaged by any sort of enemy action, then you were entitled to prosecute an attack on a target. And we were carrying what's called a response option, at which point the command and control cell, who are in a big AWACS aircraft operating over the Persian Gulf, so out of the danger area, they tell us to stand by while a plan is formulated. But there's so much going through your mind. So we have to basically, get together back with our formation. So we're in a formation of 4 aircraft within a coalition of 40 aircraft who are based out of 4 different countries. That now we've been attacked, actually the mission has changed completely. So it's like a reroute, a replan in the air. So you can see there's a lot happening at that point. Now we're told to stand by while a plan is formulated, but we're very, very quickly running out of fuel because we were right at the end of our mission. And so in that moment, leading my first mission as well, I've suddenly got this really complex situation in front of me. And it basically took me from being, leading within my capability to being right on the edge of my capability and my experience levels. But what was interesting was my boss was in my formation. He was my number 2. I had a senior executive officer as my number 3 in the formation. And so I've got all of this support and leadership within my team. And yet as the junior pilot, I continue to lead. No one leaps in and no one takes control.
Wow.
And it was a very interesting situation, was because we taught a decision-making model, which is called TDODAR. How much time do we have? Have you heard of TDODAR? Do you use that over with you guys? No. So it's a bit like your OODA loop. If you've ever heard of the OODA loop, which is another decision-making model. But TDODAR is basically how much time do we have? Diagnose the problem as the leader, not telling your team what you see, but asking them what they see. You then ask your team for options, again, getting them to generate all the options, which we then pressure test very quickly with this brand, which is benefit, risk, alternative, do nothing. Once you have all the information from your team, then you as the leader make the decision, and then you assign the tasks, there's the A, and then you review it and say what's changed. And so it's not a collaborative decision-making model, actually. It's option generation for the decision-making to sit within that leadership context. So the accountability still sits with the leader. So I quickly ran through that and we decided we would head down towards a tanker. We got down to this airborne tanker, which is like basically an airborne petrol station. And as I approached this tanker, I realized, horror, it's not the British one we were expecting, but it was something called a KC-135, which is an American tanker. And I had no clearance to tank from. So I've suddenly got this brand new piece of equipment that I have never used before. And it's the middle of the night, it's pitch black. The weather was turning, there was a blowing sandstorm. You know, I've just been shot at. I'm leading my first mission and I'm now faced with this tank and I'm thinking, what do I do? And I didn't want to let my team down. So this is all going on in my head. And so I said to my boss, can I have a go? And he said, why not? Which in hindsight was probably not the best course of action. I did have 2 attempts to refuel and actually I wasn't successful. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, if I carry on basically trying to refuel, which is you extend a probe basically, and normally on a British one, there's a basket that hangs at the end of a hose. You extend your probe and you place your moving probe into this moving basket. On a KC-135, there's a man or woman that sits at the back of the aircraft and they fly this like drogue onto your aeroplane. And I just wasn't being successful because I've never done it. And so I said to my navigator, I'm stopping. And he said, press on. So now we've got this slight conflict of opinions going on because he's got loads of experience. He's got about 8 years of flying experience and I've got very minimal frontline. But he is telling me to press on. Yet the way it works in the aircraft is that as the pilot, you're the captain and then you have the navigator. And yet he's got all the experience. So you've got this really, really strange hierarchical gradient that's going on within your own jet, plus within your formation as well. And so I decided to overrule him and I didn't press on because I thought, gosh, if I carry on, it's going to prevent the rest of my team from having a go. And we collectively had this job to do that night and it might not involve me due to my lack of skill, training or experience. And I think lack of experience was the big one. So I moved across onto the wing. We very quickly ran out of fuel and we diverted back to our base with my number 4 as my wingman. Number 2 and 3 went back into Iraq. They located the target and they destroyed the target, which was our mission that night. And I landed back at base and I felt like a real failure because I felt like I'd let the team down. I felt like I hadn't been able to do the job in that final stages. The pressure was immense. The stress was huge, talking on an acute level. And, you know, when you look at all of these different things together, there was so much on the human factors side of things when I break down that night, you know, that you can actually analyze. But one thing that I loved was when I landed, my navigator sort of put his hand on my shoulder and went, that was a really good call, Mandy. I'm sorry, I should never have put you under pressure.
Oh, cool.
You made the right decision up there. And it was one of those ones where you think, gosh, if we didn't have that environment whereby people do feel empowered to challenge at a very junior stage of their career, that whole what is culture sort of situation, then you're never going to get the learning, are you? Because you're not going to get those junior people who feel empowered to challenge and actually use their voices to be heard. And they might have a very different perspective to, say, somebody with a lot of experience. So culturally, be it in whatever world we're in, be it medicine, be it paramedics, you know, we all need to make sure that the culture actually really, truly does ensure that our junior members have a voice. And that voice is heard and that it's respected and honoured. And so at that moment, my sort of shoulders went back and I started to think, well, maybe I'm not so bad after all, you know. And then we held the debrief. And again, it's something that I know that you guys do